Welcome to CELT-cast, the bi-weekly podcast from the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Concordia, University, Wisconsin in Ann Arbor. Your hosts, Rob Balza, Kate Robertson, and Kari Bjerke, bring you conversations with professors and thought leaders from around the world, sharing fresh insights on teaching and learning. This academic year, 2025 to 26, we're focusing on one of the most transformative forces in education today, artificial intelligence. Whether you're a faculty member, educational leader, or simply passionate about learning, CELT-cast is your space to explore ideas, spark curiosity, and imagine the future of education together.
All right. Good day, everybody. Kate Robertson here from the CELT, Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Concordia University. Thanks for joining us for our podcast today. I am joined by my wonderful colleague, Kari Bjerke. Hey, Kari.
Hi, everyone.
We are joined today by Sean, and I'm going to let him do a more full intro of himself. We're just really excited to hear your perspectives with AI in the classroom today. Go for it, please.
Yeah, sure. So currently I am a assistant professor of English at Kennesaw State in Georgia. So I came to AI through, I'm actually a creative writer by trade. So I did like my MFA, that whole thing. And then during my PhD studies, I jumped on this student research position as working on this AI poetry project. So right in my domain there. And I was brought in to be the guy to like say, okay, well, we have all these computer metrics to evaluate how AI is composing poems, but how would we go about thinking about this for like human evaluators, right? And at the time we were working with a pre-chat GTP, but still transformer-based model. So the underlying technology, the T in the chat GTP, right? The transformer was already in place, but we were working with a early model. Funny enough, like this model, you instead of like the nice slick interface we see now, you were paying per token, so almost like per word and output, and then simultaneously you couldn't have more than one exchange at a time. So like it's funny just to like timestamp that, just like simply like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's like truly like explosive technology. So then at the time after we were done with the project, I was really interested in thinking about like, okay, well, we have these models with this technology trained on large corpuses, right, of our historical knowledge through the poetics. So then I was interested in saying, like, okay, what would a model look like simply trained on our own work, right? What can this tell us about our own writing practices? And then taking us a step further and saying, what would this tell us about the self, right? Simultaneously, at this time, I was also like teaching composition classes, right at the explosion of ChatGPT. So, and at the time, I was seeing a lot of faculty members with strong viewpoints, however, maybe not a strong foundational understanding of this technology. Right. So I was really interested in thinking about like what would an AI literacy curriculum look like? How could we apply these technologies in the classroom, right, without moving forward towards, say, complete banishing or totally fine with something like just a prompt and generate use strategy, right? Like how could we actually implement this technology that we're going to see infused into the workplace now and in the future even more? So yeah, that's my background in the technology. So both thinking about it from a research perspective from creative writing, but also in a very practical and applied way, right, in those writing intensive classrooms.
That's great. No, that's awesome. And we got introduced to you and your work through your recent article in theconversation.com, and it's called How I Rehumanize the College Classroom for the AI-augmented Age. And you just had some wonderful points in there that I think will really resonate and be helpful for our faculty. So the first thing I just wanted to talk about, I really appreciate that you shared in your article how you teach what you wish you were taught. And I hope you don't mind me saying you're a millennial. And so what differences do you see between your generation and the current generation of students, mostly Gen Z?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think like one of my big early things in the article is like I didn't want to come off as like kids these days in their phones, yada yada, right? Like really easy. And it's like truly like, I'm not like significantly older than them, etc. But I'm thinking a lot about how the technology around us has changed and evolved but we as learners, we as people have not changed. So like if
Mm,
we go back, and this will be good for anyone interested in the classics, right? When we go back to things like Socrates and Aristotle, right? They were talking about things like, oh, these kids are so self-centered, vain, no respect for authority, right? Even cut to say like going back to the 70s and like our pedagogy research, right? We were seeing large conversations of like ill-prepared students, no pride in work, grade inflation was already a hot topic of conversation, right? And then
right.
cut to today, right? These conversations are still very present within our frameworks, right? So I think it's more thinking about like what are those foundational skills that we are trying to teach in our classrooms, right? So even though, say, at the beginning of the release of large search engines like Google, right? Some of the rhetoric in like library studies was like, this is the death of research, right? Cut to today, we know that's not the case, right? But instead of thinking of things like what's a good keyword search, now we're thinking about like how to say funnel information appropriately, right? We are now consumers of the knowledge in terms of research and things of that nature. Yeah, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I mean it's so very interesting how things have changed, but at the same time they really have not changed, especially just like from the human aspect. And obviously, like you're very open to AI and what does that mean in learning and working with it. But you also shared in your article about the way you structure your class and how at the last 5 minutes of your classes you typically plan for some small interactions around the coursework, giving time for students to talk to each other, kind of planning for their homework or recapping what they've learned. Now, sometimes we have faculty who are like, those 5 minutes are very valuable. Like maybe it's more important to use that for more content than giving them a time to socialize and chat. So what would you say to faculty who think that using those 5 minutes is more important for content than giving students time to plan and share their homework plan?
Yeah, yeah, I love this question too. And I should say, like, at times I am also very much so like this like mythical faculty member that we're talking about, like, oh, like I need to use all this time. To not to timestamp this, but we just had like a snow day on campus. So now I'm like, oh man, my beautiful semester is now ruined because these 2 or 3 hours are gone, right? Not the case. Right. We can retool and work itself out, right? Um, I would ask faculty members to really, as we think about something like a student-centered approach, would be to be thinking about the perspective of the student, right? Early on for like, especially those early undergrad students, but even into the late students, right? For their entire educational careers, right? For over a decade, right? They were going to school 5 days a week. They were seeing those teachers every single day. They potentially had a parent or guardian figure, right, encouraging them to make sure they complete their homework, right? Their time was very much so more structured, right? Now in these classrooms, right, in the college classroom, it switches to a different model where students are only seeing their faculty member maybe a couple times a week for a few hours, right? Unlike maybe where mom was bugging them to get their homework done, right? To an extent now, students have to take the onus on themselves, right? To get that work done. So taking those 5 minutes to plan, for them to plan is like so important to me. And then also thinking about it from an efficiency standpoint, right? Think of when you're grading that homework and there's always those repetitive issues that we see are the problem, right? If you can take that time early in the semester to allow students to talk to each other, to ask questions, right? This can kind of cut some of those questions off at the pass and actually make a whole more efficient and structured like class time throughout, right? You can save yourself and end up actually covering more um, just by using those simple 5 minutes.
I love that you say that too, because it's so easy, especially as instructors, to get wrapped up in like the content and what we're trying to get the students to learn. But I mean, it's holistic. It's the whole student and what, even those soft skills are so important because if they don't have those, then, what are they even retaining if it's just in one year, out the other? But even I mean, and 5 minutes is not very long, but you're setting them up for success and they're actively thinking about like their next steps, which I think is great.
Yeah, sure. And I'm thinking about, we were talking earlier about the difference between like Gen Z and millennials. And I think Gen Z seems very interested in like very much so career forward and pragmatic
Mm.
skill building, right? In the classroom, right? So when we think about, say, maybe it's not the most important skill to say, insert this subject, memorize and insert this subject matter, but instead learning how to consume and digest this information and create our own viewpoint around this topic, synthesizing, etc. Right? That can be one of the foundational skills that you're reinstilling in this classroom and saying, hey guys, like this is actually what we're trying to accomplish here, right? The subject matter is the thing we're thinking through, but the subject matter actually just becomes the matter in which this thinking style, this work is being done through, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
I love that. Thank you. I'm just going to quote for our audience a little bit from your article and just kind of talk about AI and writing and things of that nature. So, a quote from your article is, "The point isn't whether students used AI to compose the words, it's whether the ideas feel like they originate from the person behind the words, whether they've wrestled with them long enough to know what they're trying to say. If ChatGPT helped them get there, fine. What matters is what they did after. Did they question it? Did they revise it? Did they decide it wasn't quite right and try again?" And that's the end quote. I think that many people would agree with you, but I guess how do you know that the students really actually did that wrestling and critical thinking and adding original thought when they turned in their writing and didn't just, blop it into ChatGPT and then send it to you?
Yeah, sure, sure. And I'll say, let me break AI use into two different things, right? If you're a faculty member who says, I don't want to use AI in my classroom at all, and students simply prompts and then copy paste, right? That's one thing. That's fundamentally probably just cheating. Secondarily, right? A student could be, say, mindfully using it in a way that's like augmenting it, thinking about like, okay, well, maybe I'm using it for research, but not using it to generate my text, right? This is more the lane I'm thinking through at this point. And thinking about this idea like, okay, how does a student find ownership in the text? I'll start out with a story. Okay. Early on in this technology, there was a lot of cases where students would insert this strong personal narrative about a hot topic issue like something like gun control, right? So then, as a young faculty member, I was like very nervous to talk about this paper with the student in the way that it's like I don't know what personal or emotional attachment says student has to this paper, so it can just be a difficult thing to talk about, right? And oftentimes in these conversations, I'd like prep myself up to have this big emotional discussion with the student, and then the student would have no idea what I was talking about because they never even read the text, right? So not just a hallucination of source, but a complete hallucination of personal antidote, right? Antecedent, which is very interesting to be thinking about in terms of other forms of hallucinations. So it can be something as simple as like, does the student know the information? Can you sit down with them and say, okay, well, what does this sentence mean, right? What are you trying to say? It can be something as easy as when you're beginning the assignment, right? To maybe have students write down some of their foundational thoughts about the topic, right? So it re-steers the paper and the assignment into adding their own voice, right? One framework of thinking currently in my grad class that has been brought up by students is if we think about AI being a collection of knowledge and then the text generated it being like a synthesis or a normalization of text, right? So actually, AI becomes a way to take away the own student's voice, to take away their style of thinking,
Mm.
right? To take away the unique language that they possess, right? So framing it as okay, well, this technology can do some of the early work potentially, or maybe can do some of the later work of writing and cleaning it up. But fundamentally, is this paper, this assignment, voicing what you're trying to say? right? Would be one of the things I would be thinking about to make sure it's their own critical thoughts.
And
Yeah.
that like lends itself perfectly to our next question for you. And with this idea, and we're as a university also trying to really tackle that online learning platform as well to provide to students, which can sometimes be really difficult to like keep that connection and collaboration. You discussed in your article about leaning more on student presentations, more on that public speaking, even though you obviously teach a very writing intensive course. What advice would you have for other professors, instructors who are looking to focus more on those speaking skills in their classes?
Oh, sure. I think oh yeah, this is a good opportunity to talk about this, right? I think when we're thinking about say AI is not the issue, rather AI amplifies existing problems we see in society, right? So in the educational space, this could be something like, especially in those gen ed classes, right? Majority of people teaching those positions, right, are off tenure track, most likely contingent, right? Contingent faculty members. So saying, well, I want to say smartly integrate AI in my classroom is a large ask, right, for someone who is just contracted to teach this class in a sole time,
Sure.
right? The time is not potentially being compensated in a way, right? So to do this at a large scale, right, we need to be thinking about different initiatives we can take to make sure this labor is being compensated properly, right? So that's like the big caveat to this, right? But with that being said, right, I think it'd be super awesome if you stopped down for a week and had students um, present their papers in a quick 5-minute presentation, right? Let them do a couple slides. This is a good opportunity to be thinking about what does a good presentation look like, etc. But this can also, again, just to go back to the earlier, let the students talk to each other thing. This can just be a simple, again, like 5 to 10 minute thing. It's like talk about with your peer what you did for homework, right? What did you find? What interests you? And then, right, maybe after, right, they have done this discussion, have them take notes, right? Maybe this is the first time that they have like actually looked at this output or paper if they use AI, right? Now's your opportunity to say, okay, well, what does this output say? Is it saying what I mean? Where do I need to make changes? Where else do I need to put in research or potentially change the whole structure of the paper, etc. Right? So even just building in those very small moments, right, is a really good opportunity to make sure we're engaging with this technology appropriately.
Well, Sean, I love those ideas, and it really just brings home this idea of how you're trying to keep learning human and humanize your classroom, and related to a really just poignant article you wrote last year also about how these mistakes in learning sometimes really are the learning themselves, and it's things that AI can't quite get at. So just really appreciate all your perspectives on that.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It was great. It was great talking.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to CELT-cast, brought to you by the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Concordia University, Wisconsin in Ann Arbor. We hope today's conversation gave you something valuable to take away, whether a new idea to apply in your teaching practice or simply a perspective to consider further. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Production for this episode was done by Ashley Curtin. Until next time, thank you for joining us and keep teaching faithfully.